Hello, everyone. From dramas to webtoons to novels, explore Korea's story with us. This is Who Reads Story. My name is An Sung-jin, and I'm a news reporter. And today we have a new guest with us.
Hi, I'm Jack Greenberg. I'm a freelance writer and researcher based in Seoul. Thanks for having me. I cover a lot of Korean history and the politics of memory in my work, but in my spare time, I enjoy Korean literature. So glad to be here today for this discussion.
Right, I feel like you might be the right person to shine today with our topic. And today we're going to be talking about director Lee Chang-dong's short story titled Snowy Day. And before we talk and before we delve in a bit deep, I do want to give the scenario where you have this writer, this novelist, who's been gaining a lot of popularity, who's been seen as this rising star, and all of a sudden, he disappears, he stops writing. Later on, after a few years, he shows up as this new rising star in the film industry. Now, this is director Lee Chang-dong, who we are going to be talking about today.
Yeah, he certainly has had an unusual career, and it's cinematic in its arc in a way.
Right, so this isn't just about a movie story itself. I feel like Lee Chang-dong, director himself, shows a lot of his portfolio itself. I feel like is very interesting, the transition itself from the novelist to the director. And even as a director, he's been gaining a lot of fame through the film festival in Venice or the Cannes Film Festival. And apart from that, a lot of film renowns internationally. He's also a representative director of Korea itself. Now, some, I feel like our viewers may have seen the movie itself, but they might not be familiar with the fact that he's a novelist as well, which is why you're bringing some of his stories today.
It's also quite interesting. He was South Korea's Minister of Culture under President Roh Moo-hyun from 2003 to 2004. So this is another layer to his personality. He's not only an artist who observes society and reflects it in his work, but for a brief period, he was actually shaping society's cultural direction. And, you know, it's rare for an artist to take on a role in politics, and rarer still for somebody who's expressed skepticism about power in institutions, as his work clearly shows. So what's exciting now is that Penguin Press has translated his first anthology into English, Snowy Day and Other Stories. It's translated by Heinz Insu Fenkel and Yusuf Chang. So finally, English-speaking readers have access to this director's literary roots. And now they have a chance to see another side of somebody they might already know and admire.
Right, I thought that was interesting to see because when I was going through his background and how he has grew up, it's interesting to see that he also has that aspect of the political realm, apart from the fact that he also was a novelist and a movie director himself. Now, the piece that we're going to be talking about today is Snowy Day and Other Stories, which was published in 1987, and there are other stories, including this one. 7 whole other stories are included within this book.
Yeah, so Snowy Day, it takes place on a Korean military base, and it's at the beginning of winter, and it's all about this young university-educated private. You know, he doesn't want to be in the military, but he ends up there by force.
Right.
And he's navigating this very tense relationship with his superior, Corporal Choi. And, you know, when you first look at the first couple pages, you think, oh, maybe this is an innocent romance about meeting one's first love. It's on the first snow of the season, but really it's a meditation on pride, on dignity, about how do you preserve your individuality, and also about when do you have to submit in this rigid hierarchy.
Right. For me, it was interesting how the story itself kind of went back and forth from the perspective of the young lady back to the perspective of the private. And in the beginning, as you mentioned, the interaction of the two completely seem, you know, innocent before they delve in and the story progresses. I remember reading the story with a slight tense because I can imagine what the military would have been like back then. But, you know, as for someone who isn't perhaps familiar with what the Korean military is like or what the hierarchy is like, what was it like for you while you were reading this story?
You know, where I'm from, we don't have conscription, so maybe fortunately I haven't served in the military, but I think you can still be captivated by this story. Despite its minimalism in places, it reminds you that there are these other systems in our society where you may not have power, but you're forced to deal with a hierarchy, whether it's in school, the workplace, and politics. So this story is one that quietly asks, how does a person preserve some kind of self-respect in a situation where they, on one hand, feel alienated, but they also don't necessarily have the power to change what's happening around them?
Right. I guess as you mentioned, even if conscription itself isn't applicable for you or for any of our viewers who are watching right now, the fact that, there is a society or the system of hierarchy still applies to everywhere, even if it's not within the military itself. And for you, you are a writer before a reader yourself. So I'm sure this book may have been touching in some way for you as well. If there is a particular line, phrase, or paragraph or any scene that was standing out for you, could you talk about that bit as well?
Yeah, it might not be one that jumps out to everyone. It's the line is, I think, how is it that you've only learned to resent the world? So this is Private Kim. He's recalling something that was said to him by an advisor when he's in college. And then he remembers feeling so hurt and wounded by those words. Yet he thinks the same thing about
when
Corporal
he looks at
Choi.
Corporal Choi, right?
Right. So I think it's a good example of mirroring. And he's trying to, on one hand, distance himself from his past. And it's a moment of also self-recognition. Because I think the reason it wounds him so much is that he's being told by someone he perhaps respects. You have education, you have all these life experiences, you're mature. But you haven't gained insight from life. You don't show compassion or understanding. Rather, you've let hardship crush you. You haven't grown from it. So I think now he's in a position where he's judging Corporal Choi, who's younger than him, even though he's higher in rank. The resentment of Corporal Choi is unproductive and corrosive.
It's interesting to see. It's as if like a child then now has grown to be an adult, is kind of giving advice to a kid as if he was back then. Briefly, before we go over more, I'm just going to look through the comments to see if there is anything that is being mentioned. I see how like Lee Chang-dong, someone said that Lee Chang-dong is a master of stories. His stories are quite compelling. And yeah, someone also wrote that I can't believe the movie started with a short story like that. It's interesting how, as I guess we talked about the story, how it kind of plays out, the back and forth and the perspective and all that seems to be interesting. Now for you, I guess, apart from the line that you picked out, I think Lee Chang-dong himself does a good job talking about the absurdities and human dignity of Korea back in the 1980s and 1990s. And apart from his novels, he is also renowned movie director, and he starts off his movie career in 1997 with the movie Greenfish. And he's been gaining a lot of awards from the Venice Film Festival Directors Award. He's also gotten the award of the screenplay at the Cannes Film Festival. So I feel like apart from his novels that we just talked about, his movies has been gaining a lot of recognition as well. But have you seen any of his movies?
Yeah, I think he's only made about 6 movies. I haven't seen all of them. First one I saw was Burning, which is actually based off of a short story by Haruki Murakami. I've also seen Peppermint Candy and Poetry. So there are still a few I haven't seen.
Right. I feel like whether it be Peppermint Candy, Burning, I feel like those are the ones that have been a little bit more representative of Korean movies. But for you, since you've now read his novel and watched his movie, do you have a one that you prefer more?
I think personally, I just enjoy books more than films in general, and that's the case here as well. It's not that the movies are bad, because they aren't. I think just when I'm reading a story, I can reflect a bit more and go back, think about it. It's harder to do that rewinding a film,
right?
Especially if you're watching it in the theater or something. But yeah, what I liked about the stories is that they're raw.
Yes.
You can really feel the emotion. I think he says in the author's notes that you can read this like a diary. There's very little fictionalization. So it's authentic.
Right. I think another interesting about books themselves is the fact that like it gives room for imagination because they're only words, whereas if you watch a movie, you're already visualizing it through the screen or the scene itself.
Oh, absolutely.
So I feel like, for the book on its own, you get to think more about it. You get to picture your own perhaps imagination based on what the lines are just giving. And I guess it's interesting because, I said that Lee Chang-dong has become a movie director from a novelist. And the reason why this is interesting is because in a previous interview, he said that, as I turn 40, I try to boost myself mentally and physically. And, that's a reason why he started making these movies. And after the 1990s, he's been constantly creating these movies, even though there are only a couple pieces, like 6.
Yeah.
And as you just mentioned, I would like to recommend the movie Peppermint Candy. It's been released in 1999, and it was ranked as one of the best movies within that year domestically, but it's also been invited to the Cannes Film Festival for the Director's Fortnight, and I guess that's how director Lee Chang-dong kind of ended up becoming this more renowned film director worldwide.
It's a film that I only watched a few weeks ago, but it's so powerful. It's not only about the personal trauma of the protagonist, but it's a film that reflects these major moments in modern and contemporary Korean history. And I think he's almost conducting this sort of moral autopsy on these events and how do those shape the protagonist's life. He's in the military when the Gwangju uprising is happening. Then he becomes a police officer who is engaging or torturing suspects. That becomes an exciting trauma. Later, he's a businessman when the IMF crisis is unfolding. So the protagonist, his life, it's reflecting social upheaval and how does social upheaval devastate one's own self? How do they try to maintain innocence but somehow lose that as well?
Right. I feel like because he was in the scenes back then, he does a good job embedding the societal values or what the historical background was like back then into his novels or into his movies. And for most of the characters that he portrays within, whether it be his movie or his novels, I think he does a good job trying to portray the history of all these characters. And he does it through a very intimate and painful way, whether it be as seen in Snowy Day or through Peppermint Candy.
Yeah, it doesn't feel forced, which is something that really stands out in comparisons to some other writers. But one thing that also struck me between Peppermint Candy and Snowy Day is they kind of mirror each other, or one mirrors the other. They both include these scenes where a woman is trying to visit her man at a military base, only to be blocked for one reason or another from seeing him. It kind of reflects the era where, personal relationships are disrupted by martial law, by institutional control. Something as simple as a visit between two lovers, it becomes impossible because of these broader power structures.
Right. Again, I guess that reflects what the society was like then, whether it be through the hierarchy. And I guess what's interesting is that the story itself is kind of based off of director Lee Chang-dong's personal experience of how he actually went through all this of, while he was on guard duty, he met this young lady, and that entire conversation has been memoed, noted, and then developed into a story. And I guess, how that further develops on is within the story of Snowy Day. So for those that haven't read it, I guess that's something that we'd recommend to read. And I'm just going to scan through the comments to see. Yeah, people have been pointing out how it's amazing that these novels came before movies. He started as a novelist and then he progressed into a movie director. And someone said that, Snowy Day is sadder because the background is snow. I feel like that also added a sense of dramatic effect because, again, director Lee Chang-dong, he later talks about it in an interview with The New Yorker. He says that, he's purposely set the background as Snowy Day because, in Korea, people say that, when they meet their first lover, they're like, we'll meet again on a snowy day or something like that. So I guess the background is also interesting on how Lee Chang-dong portrays his movie or his films or his novels.
Right.
Yes.
I think whatever work of Lee Chang-dong that you encounter, you're going to see that he really breaks with appearances. Right. He breaks with pride and national image. Some might feel a discomfort when they encounter his work because, it's revealing parts of Korean society that one might say are embarrassing or don't cast the nation in the best light. But I don't think he's doing this to sensationalize or to cause scandal. He's really asking his reader or his viewer to rise above judgment to really approach these subject matters with a sort of moral seriousness. His characters are neither villains nor victims. Right. They're the type of people who you look at them and you say, what does it take to live a meaningful life in a society that is not always honest? You have to sit with tension and really embrace that tension to get the value of what he's offering you.
Right. I guess all that you've mentioned is interesting because even though within the novel itself, within the story, he does do a good job depicting it. I think his sentences or phrases can be descriptive, but they're never too vivid. As you said, they're never very specific about certain scenes. They're never really, they don't go in too in-depth of describing what the scene itself is, which is why I guess it makes me want to read more of his other stories or his novels.
I think they kind of all come together like a puzzle at a certain point.
That's true.
You see the lines between them, and then once you understand one, it helps you understand the next one.
Right.
So what's great about this anthology is the stories build on each other. So when you get to the end, you're like, wow, now I understand his thought process and what his craft is.
And it also reflects the historical or the social background of what Korea was going through back then. And today, so far, we've talked about how director Lee Chang-dong or novelist Lee Chang-dong unfolds his own world through novels or films. And we've kind of gotten a glimpse of how he does a good job on unveiling whether it be societal values or historical background of itself. But, as we've just talked about, I guess within all of his pieces, he kind of throws in a question for the readers to think about. Yeah,
I think he's great at using the human gaze. So they're personal, yet they're deeply political.
That's true.
So they're resisting those neat morals, and then, who gets crushed by history? Whose stories disappear or are not left behind, and how do we excavate those at a certain point?
Right. And these problems are never on the surface and never explicitly stated. They come through, as you say, the human gaze. It's the characters that go on and develop and kind of unfold how these problems rise within the story. It's interesting because, again, director Lee Chang-dong has come in again. He's returned after 7 years with his new movie, Possible Love.
Yes, it's quite exciting. This time it's actually being distributed by Netflix. And it has some foreign funding from the French, so it's going to be interesting to see what he does with this. I think it was only this week that they announced that stars who worked with him in Peppermint Candy and Secret Sunshine will be appearing. The plot, we only now know a little bit that it's, how are the lives of two married couples who are quite different from each other, how are they intertwined and how do they affect one another when they meet? So there's still some suspense. We don't know entirely what's going to happen, but that kind of makes it more exciting. There's an anticipation both with him returning and then what are we going to be offered this time that's different from his other films.
Right, and as you mentioned, there are other factors that may play in the role of his new film. And the filming is supposedly to begin by the end of this year, and it is going to be released in 2026. So before that, for our viewers who haven't potentially looked into his films or his novels, give it a read. I mean, give a read for Snow Day and his other stories that we've talked about today. And that is kind of all we have for today. And how was it, Jack? I feel like you're an expert. I feel like you delve deep into all of his pieces from a historical viewpoint or like a societal viewpoint. Right. What was it like?
No, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that our conversation encourages some of the viewers to pick up his work or turn it on and see another side of Korea and its history and experience it that way. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I've seen some comments from our viewers talking about Burning and of some of his other pieces. So, for our viewers that haven't seen any of his films or novels yet, give it a read. And that is all we have for today's Who Reads Story. Thank you again, Jack, for being here with us. And for our viewers, don't forget to leave a like and a comment and subscribe to our channel. This is all we have for Who Reads Story, and I will be back next week with a new episode on Korean content. Thank you for being with us. Bye.